Hi, my name's David. The nice people over at QUBE asked me to show you how to make 2 American classics, so I thought I'd show you 3. We'll start off with some nice lamb chops, and we'll finish off with some crayfish, and in the middle, you can't get more American than apple pie. The pies today are hand pies, so there's no pans to clean up or to get in the way of the smoke. You can pick up frozen pie crust in sheets at most grocery stores and they'll work really well. But I'm going to show you a pretty quick and easy crust that you can make by yourself. You can make this with a pastry cutter or just by rubbing the butter together with your fingers. But I'm going to be using a food processor. It's faster, it's easier, and I'm a little bit lazy. So all you need to do to make this is you're going to need about 240 grams of flour. You can sift it. I generally don't. Again, the food processor is going to make it a whole lot easier. Just going to put that in the food processor. Then we're going to need about a stick of butter, which is about 100 grams. Cold is better. And then we're just going to cut it into some small pieces, and then we're going to put them right into the food processor and pulse it a few times. Just want to do this until the butter is sort of broken up into small pieces. When the flour starts to have this kind of golden color with most of the butter broken up, we're going to be adding in about 7 tablespoons. I use this tablespoon here of water. Be careful, don't add it all at once. Leave a little bit just in case you don't need all of it at the same time. And then we're just going to pulse it again, and you'll see that it starts to stick together and has a nice stick together, and you smush it. I'm going to put in the last little bit of the water, hopefully not put the lid on backwards again. Just give it one more little turnaround, and that is it. Put it out onto some kind of a work surface, press it all together, and it forms into a very nice soft dough. It's always a good idea to let the dough rest for a while, half an hour, hour. I generally put it in the refrigerator, which is what I'm going to go do right now. A little while, we'll take this back out and we'll go ahead and fill it, and then we will make little apple pies. Now it's time for the apple pie filling. Apple pie filling, or really any kind of an apple dish, is usually going to be better if you have more than one kind of apple. The types of apples that you can use is very, very subjective. I'm not going to try to tell you which ones are best. What I have today are 2 red apples and 2 yellow-green apples. These are both dessert type apples, meaning that they're more sweet and not going to be very sour. Prepping them is really very simple. All you need to do is peel them, core them, and cut them up into the size that you want. If you peel them first or peel them last, it doesn't really matter. I'm just going to go ahead and get started. So there are a lot of different ways to cut up apples. For me, I think the easiest way is just to go next to the core. I typically put the stem side down next to the core and cut off a nice big slice. You'll see that the core of the apple, you may get a little bit of the inside, but it's not really too much. And then just do the same thing over here, and then just flip it over and cut off big sections of the apple. It leaves a little bit of a square core, but for me, it's the easiest way to go about doing it. And I just cut it up into reasonably thin slices, and if you feel like they're too long, you can just cut them in half. Alright, now that you have your apples all cut up, you're going to need to put some seasoning or spices on them. I try to go pretty simple with spices. I typically add a little bit of salt, some cinnamon, and some nutmeg. But I like to use an actual nutmeg instead of the powdered nutmeg. So I use a microplane, and then I just take the actual nutmeg and I grind it up. You can do that with a cinnamon quill, but I really like cinnamon, and this takes a really long time to grind that up. So I typically will use the cinnamon. I sprinkle it over the top just until it has a pretty nice coating. You could measure it out, but it's very taste specific. And then you're going to want to use maybe about half as much nutmeg as you use cinnamon. Now again, if you're using one of these, it does get pretty simple, but you're going to drop it a bunch of times. Like I said, a little bit of salt on top. And then there's one more thing, and that is ground ginger. Ground ginger is a little bit hard to find in Taiwan. A few years ago, I realized that you could actually use Chinese 5-spice. Now this has a little bit of cinnamon, it has star anise, it has a few other things, but if you just use a little bit, it actually does help the flavor quite a lot, and makes it a lot more like had you used ground ginger. There are other things that you can add in. You can add in fresh thyme, just like we did with the lamb chops. Rosemary also works very well, but this is really just a very basic, simple apple pie. All right. Then we're just going to mix it up together, try to get all of the apple pieces coated. The various powders are going to draw out some of the water from the apples, so you're going to want to leave it for a few minutes, but you don't have to leave it for a long time. It'll help to get them to soften up just a bit. And then if you want, you can add some brown sugar over the top. Really up to you how much or how little you add, but again, the brown sugar will help to draw out some of the water from the apples, and it will sweeten them up a little bit. These are already dessert apples, so you don't really want to add too much. Okay, so now it's just time to roll out the dough, stuff them, and get them in the smoke. Okay, it's time to get the crust rolled out, stuffed, and the apple pies into the smoker. So here we have the dough that we made earlier. The first thing we're going to do is we're just going to cut it into 4 roughly even pieces. Each piece is going to be 1 hand pie. Now generally what I do is I just try to make it into a little bit more of a ball, flatten it out into the middle of my little mat here, and then I use a rolling pin. I like the one that has a pattern on it. It tends to stick less, and the fact that it's plastic also helps it to stick less. You can find them at a lot of the baking stores or the craft type stores. Generally it's easier to roll them out a little bit long and then turn it and go sideways, and then just do that again. Instead of flipping it over directly, to flip it over so that it goes 90 degrees every time. My surface today is not exactly the flattest thing in the world, so it's not going to come out the best that it could have. But it's okay. One of the things about homemade anything is that it is not necessarily going to look perfect. If it looks perfect, great. If it doesn't look perfect, also great. Once you have it rolled out fairly thin, if you get a little bit of a break, don't worry about it. Just roll them over each other. Tap it down with your finger, and it will be fine. So you've got a nice size. You're going to want to take about 1/4 of the apples that you have, and we're going to put them in the middle, more or less to one side. Pull the top over. Try not to break too much. Now, unlike the first attempt, we're going to try to put a little bit less apple so that it doesn't break the skin all to pieces. I'm going to put it on one side more than the other, and we're just going to fold it over and pinch down the sides. Now, there's a bunch of different ways that you can crimp the sides. You could just use a fork, or you can kind of use your fingers to kind of alternate between top and bottom. The important thing is just to try to make sure that it is all crimped together. Now we are going to poke a couple of holes in the top, so if there is a couple of extra holes in the sides. The way that you make the pies is really up to you. Even if you just want to make it where the pie crust just comes up around the outside, all of them work really, really well. I have these silicone nets that I use whenever something is a little bit more delicate and a little bit more difficult to take on and off of the metal racks. So I'm going to use that to put my very, very beautiful pies into the smoker. One thing before you do it though is you're going to want to put an egg wash over the top. Real simple, you just take an egg, into a plate or a bowl, use a basting brush just to mix it up a little bit, break the yolk up, and then we're just going to brush this over the top. It helps give it a nice color. And now it's time to just go ahead and put them in the smoker. Alright, so we're going to be moving this up to the 176 degrees Celsius mark, which is between 162 and 190. And then we're going to open this up. Again, right about an hour until everything is nice and golden brown on the outside and everything is hot and delicious inside. So when I put these in, I said it was going to be 45 minutes to an hour or so. And that can be true, but it can also be a little bit quicker. What I recommend is to use a wooden skewer like this. Find yourself a little bit of apple and see if the apples are soft. Once the apples are soft, and you can then look at the crust and make sure the crust is dry on the outside and maybe a little bit flaky, and then you'll know that the crust is also done. Then it's fine to take them out, even if it's been less than the time that I said. So I'm going to go ahead and pull these out. Now these pies, again, were in there for about 30 to 40 minutes. They're nice and crispy. The apples are nice and soft. Now you could eat them just like they are now. You could put a little bit of brown sugar over the top to give them a little bit more of a sweet or nice feeling. You could put a little bit of vanilla ice cream. There's a lot of different ways to eat these, but the important thing is to actually make your own things and to make them the way that you like.